Hi, welcome to the Learner Centered Collaborative podcast. I am so excited to be here today. We have the most special guest who should be no stranger to many of you in the LCC world. Devin Vodicka, our CEO, had many roles in education, including award-winning superintendent, author of Learner Centered Leadership, dad, trusted and respected advisor to many people. Welcome to the podcast, Devin.
Thank you, Katie. It's a pleasure to be here.
So glad to have you. Many people know you, but let's start off sharing a little bit about why this work matters to you. You've been, in education your entire career in many forms, but tell us a little bit about how you got started and why you're still here.
Yeah. Well, I think there's three things that come to mind with that question. First is, growing up in an immigrant family, having a sense of being a cultural outsider with my dad being Czech, my mom being Dutch, growing up in a small town where we were the only Czech and Dutch family around. That definitely shaped my view that all learners need to be seen, need to be valued. We need to build off the unique identity of each of our learners. That is definitely fueled by my personal experience as a young learner. So that would be one. Two is, all of the insights that I had watching my mom, who was a computer teacher, with all these innovations with technology, going back to, breakthroughs like laser discs and things like that. Just give me a sense of possibility for what the future of education might hold. And so I think if you combine that sense of possibility with emerging technology, coupled with this view of being a cultural outsider, and then you combine it with some hard realities of what the results have been with our industrial age system of education, it's undeniable that we're not connecting with every learner, and that we can do a much better job of building on the strengths of individuals and communities with some different models. But definitely my own sense of conviction is really fueled by those personal experiences.
I had this flashback of my kitchen table, and we didn't necessarily eat at it because that's where we housed our computer. So that would be the place that, we would all have papers around it, sitting with my brother at the table, working on the big Apple IIgs. And now we all have our own devices and a place to eat dinner together. It's lovely.
That's exactly right. Yeah, we actually had an Apple II Plus in our house that the Smithsonian asked for because it was such an early version of a personal computer. And you're right, it was such a novelty, as a child, and it was relatively new in the world, but so many changes have happened in our society due to advancements in the role of technology. And, it's had a lot of really positive effects in terms of our ability to connect and communicate and, access information. But man, there have been a lot of changes since I was a kid.
So I'm curious, what year was the Apple II Plus?
Oh boy. It would have been early 80s that we had it. My dad actually built a computer in our garage that he claims was more powerful than the Apple II Plus, but he never took it to market. So it's a little bit of a family, family story. But yeah, I feel really fortunate in the sense of, in some ways, I feel like I was among the first of the digital natives. Even though the technology was really primitive by today's comparison, I really don't have many memories of, what life was like without some sort of computer in our home. But I think we were sort of at the front edge of that wave because my parents were computer teachers and technologists.
Yeah. Awesome. So also your dad, you can say it, but you got to put your ideas out there. Otherwise they stay in the garage.
Very true. Very true.
So speaking of which, we did put an idea out there. We actually just celebrated 365 days of the Learner Centered Collaborative. But we've been on the journey much longer, right? As we know, things don't just like appear out of nowhere. How would you describe how we got here?
By we, you mean the two of us?
Yeah, our whole team. Yeah, like how did we get to the LCC team? 365 days. It's been a journey.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I think of there are some really pivotal moments along the way. And the two of us first connected when you were at the University of San Diego in the Mobile Learning and Technology Center.
Great name, by the way.
Yes, it took me a moment to remember was it Mobile Technology and Learning or Mobile Learning and
Yeah,
Technology?
MTLC, back in the day,
MTLC.
Mobile
Okay.
Technology Learning Center.
Yeah, so back, what, about eight years ago-ish, you and I met while you were at the university. I was superintendent in Vista. Our paths started to converge more and more frequently. We were running in similar circles with the League of Innovative Schools through Digital Promise. And I remember when we hosted the League of Innovative Schools meeting along with Cajon Valley School District, we did TED Talks on the same day. Through those experiences, I think there was a strong sense of alignment around what was possible in the future. I remember you were really focused on what was sort of being called personalized professional learning at the time, which was a very novel concept, but something that we really needed in the world. And then when I went to alt school as the chief impact officer, shortly after that, you went to Buck Institute. And both of those organizations had a home base around San Francisco. And so we continue to stay in touch there. And I remember being asked at alt school to identify some speakers who could come and work with our team around the future of education. And about that time, your book, Learner-Centered Innovation, was coming out. And so I recommended that we bring you in to share your perspective with our team. And sort of unexpectedly through that process, you ended up getting hired with alt school.
It's a very irresistible team.
Yes, it was a great confluence of events there. And from that time at alt school, we were originally running competency-based personalized learning, whole child micro schools. We were developing technology, and we were also at the very early stages of building a set of services to help schools with the adaptive changes. And you were just a perfect fit at that time to help us build out those services. And of course, over time, we ended up selling the schools, we sold the software, and all of that led us to have this amazing opportunity to create this national nonprofit, building on those insights as Learner-Centered Collaborative. And it's not exactly the way we probably would have drawn it up, 8 years ago, but it feels like fate and destiny are working in magical ways. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. It's been an incredible journey.
Yeah, I often tell people that organizations may have changed, but the work has stayed the same. That through line of really creating authentic experiences, supporting educators, change management around leveraging technology in ways that are superpowering educators and superpowering the learners in ways that actually meet the needs of the world we live in. So it has been some interesting twists and turns, but it feels like exactly the right place. And our team along the way has been so incredible, such amazing educators, leaders, organizers, really just allowing us to support the growing network of partners that we have, which is really fun to see.
That's right.
So, we have the Learner-Centered Collaborative. My first book you mentioned was Learner-Centered Innovation. Then you wrote Learner-Centered Leadership. Now we've co-founded the Learner-Centered Collaborative, a little bit of a tongue twister. Maybe we should anchor people on what does it mean to be learner-centered?
Yeah.
Want to start?
I will give it a shot, and then I'm sure we will add to it. But to me, it all goes back to listening to learners, seeing our learners. I mean, I go back to my own experience, feeling unseen as a young learner. But then I also had this really transformational experience as a superintendent, sitting down doing these sessions listening to students and really hearing who they were and what their hopes and dreams were and what their challenges were, and also their insights on the experience of schooling. That really led us, while I was superintendent, to reimagine what is possible for learners. And it was our students who said that they wanted more relevant, authentic learning experiences. They wanted those to be tied to meaningful challenges in the world and in the community, that they loved learning. They just wanted it to be meaningful and relevant. And in order to do that, they would need more social experiences, and they would need new tools, and they would need the ability for that to be flexible and adaptable so that they could move at their own rates. So to me, learner-centered is all about being responsive to what is fairly common in terms of our human needs as individuals and as learners. And if we co-design, co-construct with learners, we end up with more powerful learning, more powerful development, more powerful growth. And so, that to me is the essence of it. And of course, we have now frameworks that we use, and there are definitions in some of the books you mentioned. But to me, it's about seeing, knowing, listening to learners at the core and being responsive to what is unique about each of them.
Yeah, I love that. And I appreciate that. And I think that a lot of people will say, well, two things that I hear kind of challenging or in question of that framing is, one, well, of course we're student-centered, right? Why isn't it just student-centered? Of course, that's what schools are all about. And we well know that although students are the core, it is not necessarily what schools were designed to focus on, and learning wasn't necessarily at the core of the design either. And so when we think about this shift to learner-centered, it's really not just about students, it's about the adults in the system as well. So we often say, right, that everybody is a learner. And if we are going to shift and grow and evolve, then everybody has to have that orientation as a learner. And I always love when people have graduate profiles. That's a huge thing that we support people with, but it is only half of the puzzle piece or whatever. If you only focus on students, because if the adults in the building aren't also being collaborative, innovative, empowered learners, then it's hard to model and create those experiences for our students. So that, in a sense, is a core of learner-centered, that it involves all of us. And the second thing people always ask me was like, well, if it's learner-centered, then do I just have to sit back and let people do whatever they want, right? And so want to clarify too that it is not a free-for-all.
Right.
Agency is a critical aspect of learner-centered schools for adults and young people. But yes, there are constraints, there are goals, right? We have clear goals, we have very high expectations. We are just more open and flexible in the path based on the need of the learner, but that there is not just mayhem when you open schools.
Right.
They're often very structured and organized, but they are, like you said, co-designed, co-constructed with the learners so that people are getting what they need, not everyone in a standardized system.
Yeah. Well, you made so many important points in there. One is that we're all learners, and we need to be oriented to that ongoing growth and development, exploration as adults, just as models for our learners. But also the other thing which you touched on, which is so important, is our system, the industrial age system, was really not geared around learning. It was geared around compliance and standardization and efficiency. And a lot of our systems and structures are designed to find out, can you follow instructions? Can you do what you're told when you're told how to do it? And the world around us has changed so much that it actually requires us to now be learners. And that is a very different imperative for sure. So those are really profound points that I just want to emphasize. And your last comment there around, sometimes people see it as binary. Either you have structure and you have conformity and you have compliance, or you have chaos. That's not a helpful framing. I would say, our challenge if we want to have powerful individual and collective learning, is to find that balance of structure and flexibility so that we do have agency and autonomy, and we recognize that we are social and we exist in community. And so there is this balance of how do we create the right level of constraints and structures and expectations that really allows and supports us to be at our best as individuals and as community. And I think this idea of shifting from an either or mindset to a both and is part of the paradigm shift from what we've had in the past and what we need in the future.
Yeah, it's often a mindset. And I think that some people will say, like, well, what's the right answer? And I always tell people, if I had the blueprint for exactly what should happen in every school, I certainly wouldn't hold it back. But it depends on context. It depends on your learners. It depends on the age band. So you can't say, like, here is the right set of constraints,
Right.
because it matters and it will continue to evolve based on where the learners are, based on the challenges that they're facing and the opportunities that exist within certain communities.
Well, and you're really helpful in pointing out that it's all about what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
How do we get really clear about the outcomes that we hold most dear as individuals and as a community? And it is that shared sense of purpose, that shared sense of direction that is going to give us some guidance as we navigate a very dynamic, adaptive context to help us move forward together. And so, the other part of learner-centered education that is emphasized in your books and mine and all the different frameworks is that we have to get very clear about what it is that we're trying to achieve with community as a really critical first step, so that we do have an orientation that helps us to better understand if the structures or the level of flexibility that we have in a certain context are serving us well.
Yeah, I think that, as you know, it's so important. We just hosted a panel recently, and I was reminded that, people hold assumptions about what school is. We hold assumptions about what work is. And as parents, we hold many assumptions about what it means to be a good parent and help our children navigate their path to success. And sometimes all of these individuals, without talking to one another, blame each other or make assumptions based on how they should act. And it's this self-fulfilling cycle. So I also just think that those outcomes, getting clear as communities and whoever's working together to figure out what are we actually working toward? Because we often find that although people might say, no, in school, you need the skills, you need to be able to come to work and show up. At the end of the day, it's people call it soft skills, durable skills. I don't particularly love the term soft skills because I think they're absolutely the most critical. Right. And that's going to raise the bar in many of our schools when we start focusing on those whole child outcomes. And when we think about that, that often is when we come to some alignment rather than disagreement, but our own beliefs and ways of growing up sometimes think that we're at opposite ends of the spectrum. So I'm just curious how you've navigated some of those too. Maybe you can share some of your wise insights.
I don't know about wise, but I think you're right. And I think, we all have a certain filter, a certain view of the world that is a product of our experience and our conditioning. That view, that lens of the world that we have is often unseen and sort of granted. And we do, as you said, generalize, and we presume other people have the same lens or the same view. And so it's really about bringing people together to ask questions and have conversations that helps to surface some of those tensions, but also some of the areas of convergence.
Right.
You hear me often, referencing Margaret Wheatley's influence in my view of leadership, but she talks about leadership is about being a social host, bringing people together and getting them into conversations so that they can really get to know one another. And it's through that social exchange that I think we do create that sense of convergence and commonality. And it also gives us a sense of how to explore the tensions that may exist. And part of the reason I like that social host concept is you have to be safe in order to explore those dynamics. And, the idea of being in a social setting and having conversation is low threat. And I think sometimes we need to do more to create a safe environment for those meaningful exchanges where we can be authentic and really explore ourselves and get a sense of what those views of the world are.
Right, because it's like the polarities you talked about, right? It's not either or. There
Right.
are lessons to be learned from these different perspectives.
Right.
And when we humble ourselves enough to listen
Mhm.
and figure out, maybe when you're, speaking into the echo chamber and, everyone agrees, it's one thing. But when you start talking to people with different perspectives, you start poking holes and you start thinking about, oh, I didn't think about it that way. And collectively, it makes us better. So I
Mhm.
love being able to, bring people together in a way that's safe, in
Mhm.
a way that as safe as possible, but in a way that honors different people. So you're not having a debate where you're going against each other, but you're collectively coming together to find some agreement.
Yeah.
And one of my big reflections from this, the last week and some of these conversations that we've had in the panel was when we don't name the skills that are the most critical. So when we say, oh yeah, those skills matter, and I can teach you how to do a job, but if you don't come ready to collaborate, if you don't come ready to learn, if you don't come able to be innovative and flexible, then you're going to struggle in many jobs. The problem is when we don't name those things, we don't teach all kids those things. And
Mhm.
so we leave it to chance. And the ones who are often successful are not the ones who got an A on the test.
Mhm.
They're the ones who learned to be adaptive, flexible, creative, so that they could navigate. Right. And I think that is where I'm seeing more opportunity to have these conversations, is we don't want to leave those things to chance. We want to raise the bar to not just be about math, reading, writing, and science, but to be inclusive of those things and in the skills that matter most, so that kids can be successful in whatever path they choose.
Yes, totally agree. And might be jumping ahead, but one of the things I'm excited about is to see so many educators and schools and communities recognizing how important that step is of surfacing the most important knowledge, habits, skills that all learners need to be developing in order to know themselves, thrive in community, actively engage in the world as their best selves. And so it seems like, particularly on the heels of this very, very challenging period of time through the pandemic, there's a moment here where we can have a little bit of a reset around, well, what are we really trying to achieve? And how do we get more clear and specific about what those whole learner outcomes are, so that we don't leave them the chance, because we've seen what happens when we do leave them the chance, and those consequences are really, they're not good for individuals or communities.
Yeah. Well, we know, thankfully, there's a lot of bright spots, right? There's a lot of schools, districts, states who are engaging in this work and who actually were able to navigate the pandemic and more successfully in many ways, because they had systems set up and they'd been working on this. Vista being one of those districts, thanks to your leadership, that has really been successful throughout. So we have close to 150 partnerships at LCC that range from small lab schools, charter schools, brand new schools, redesigns, but also districts and states. What are some of the things that you've learned along the way throughout some of these partnerships?
Ooh, that's a good question. That's a big one. I think coming into this work, I felt I felt like I had seen what change looked like in an individual classroom as a teacher, an individual school as a principal, an individual school district as a district leader. And it's been so interesting to see change in many communities over these past few years. I have really had my eyes opened to the wide range of experiences that are out there. We were talking about how there's a human tendency to generalize your lens of the world. And, most of my experience is Southern California, sort of a suburban school districts. And man, have I had an education in how big this country is and how many different settings there are. Going back to the original micro schools that we were running, they were independent schools where independent private schools, parents were paying tuition, and that was totally new to me. And many of our first partners were also very small independent schools that in a lot of ways were very different. They didn't have elected boards, they didn't have ed code, they didn't have collective bargaining. But what you really quickly realize in these schools, and I'm thinking of, one of my first visits to Kohelet Yeshiva outside of Philadelphia, a small Jewish day school that was one of our first partners. One of the things that is most, I think, inspiring about seeing what's actually happening is we are all human. We are all learners. And whether you're talking about, a small Jewish day school outside of Philadelphia or a public school district, coastal San Diego, there are some really common human needs that surface in these environments. But I also had a chance to go to Phillips Andover Academy outside of Boston, where several presidents have come through that school. Punahou out, in Honolulu, where Obama was a student. So I've seen these incredible independent schools. But then we also work with schools in rural Kentucky, where they have Bring Your Tractor to Work Day. Schools, all over the country. And so whether it's rural, suburban, urban, independent school, charter schools, public schools, to me, it's far less about the governance model and far more about the fact that we are all learners. That's like the biggest takeaway for me, just as an individual. But I have been really excited to see how in all of these diverse settings, we see more of an orientation around getting clear about outcomes, and then also getting very serious about, well, what are the learning experiences that we need to have to get to those whole learner outcomes? So if we really are talking about developing agency and collaboration and problem solving, what does that look like for our learners? How do we implement competency-based systems, personalized learning, authentic learning, inclusive communities? And it's just been fascinating. And then more recently, with districts like Santa Ana or Orange County Department of Education, we've been focusing a little more on the enabling conditions, relational trust, having a framework for the future. And so all of these, I just find them to be very inspiring examples of what's possible. And these schools, these systems, they would tell you they're all on the journey. They're the best version of themselves yet, but there's so much possibility and potential, and also so much movement that it really gives me the sense that we're at the front edge of some much needed changes for learners.
Yeah, I love that. Design 39, one of my favorite schools to visit. And they always say, we are the best versions of ourselves yet. And I think, to me, I've seen many of those schools and in different ways, that variety. What I see as the critical piece is the mindset of the people in the buildings, right? It is, the buildings can be beautiful. We have seen Seeks, that is a small outdoor tent, that is an amazing school in Hawaii, and it is not the facility. They're beautiful and they can help, but it's not the new STEM lab. It's not the flexible furniture. First and foremost, it is the people in the system.
Yes.
Their orientation, how they see learners, and ultimately how you said they design those experiences necessary. So it's really fun to see, and I'm just excited for these partnerships to continue to grow, and the bright spots to continue to ripple out into the world. So a few questions as we close up. I want to When you left, you talked a little bit about your transition from Vista to alt school,
Yep.
to startup world. And you had written a series of blog posts that that got quite a bit of traction,
Mhm.
from superintendency to startup.
Mhm.
So you talked a little bit about what's possible. You talked about these bright spots. Where do you see opportunities for school districts to really think about more flexibility as you've left and entered the world of startup and now nonprofit?
Yeah. Well, there are many, and that's one of the things that's encouraging is there's not just one way to make movement. And I loved how you said that it's a mindset shift and it's a different paradigm. Learner-centered education is a different paradigm, and within that, there's a whole host of opportunities ranging from starting new schools like Synergy in Mineola, or like we saw with Peninsula School District, micro schools. There's a whole host of big moves that can happen in any setting, new schools, shifts in grading policies, lots of different things that can happen. But one of the really striking things to me, going from a 100-year-old public school district to a startup, was just the difference in the culture of the organization. And so there's a little bit of an exaggeration to this, but I think it hopefully will illustrate a point and also illustrate an opportunity that seems very present to me. So in a 100-year-old public school district, the orientation is primarily to inclusion. And that permeates the organization in so many different ways. You can't make a decision at a board meeting unless it's been agendized. And to put it on the agenda requires public notice. And that public notice is for the purpose of inviting people into the conversation and allowing for public discourse. And that's one example, but you see it not just with school boards, you see it with school site councils, you see it with student councils, you see it with all sorts of decision-making systems where the orientation is, let's bring in the community, let's have it be an inclusive process. And the result of that is, a sense of community ownership that is really, really important. And a sort of a trade-off of that is that it moves very, very, very slowly because there are multiple layers of this decision-making. And it's also local and it's state and it's federal. And so it's a system that's very inclusive, but also very, very slow. And if you contrast that with the startup world, in the startup world, the orientation is to speed. And that speed can allow you to move very, very quickly and to ideate and prototype and test and get feedback and validate concepts very, very fast, or invalidate those concepts. But you are constantly in this mode of action. And it is not an inclusive process. There are very few stakeholders involved in that decision-making process. And so, you have in a public school system, it's slow but inclusive, and startups are fast but exclusive in some way. And what I realized, having tried in a public school system to implement a lot of the methodologies of sprint cycles and agile networks in a public school system, and then in the startup world, trying to implement, how do we bring in more people and make this more participatory? The thing that occurred to me after a while is what we really need is partnership across these communities. And we need to retain that spirit of inclusion that exists in public school systems where we are serving the public, and that spirit of exploration and speed that you get in startups. And what I imagine in the future is a constellation of inclusive public school systems with lots of partnerships that are more that are fast moving, that can test ideas and provide that feedback to inform the ongoing growth of a broader community.
Yeah.
So I think it's really it's the both and instead of the either or that I see as the future of organizational improvement.
I love that. And we've seen examples. You mentioned Synergy and Mineola, these dual operating systems of, lab schools. Let's try this out. Let's create some boundaries around it while still retaining the traditional structure that many people feel safe in. And, you don't want to just totally disrupt everything without really having examples and prototypes to get people's feedback on. But I think, as I heard you talking about that, it's the top down versus bottom up. And so often in a traditional system, you have to have all the answers right before you start something. And we don't yet know them, right? With the practices, the world, everything evolving, we also need to get into classrooms, test ideas, work with learners. And often the best ideas are coming from our educators every day who are with students, who are seeing the challenges, but also the opportunities. And, as I often say, that if educators aren't the ones making decisions, if we aren't pushing most of those decisions to the educators and them to their students, we are missing out on tremendous opportunities to change what's happening day in and day out in our classrooms.
Yeah, totally agree. And what you said about, we can't wait 3 years to make a decision has been confirmed by our experience over the past couple of years. The context around us is changing so fast. We do not have the luxury of taking 3 years to make a decision. We need to be orienting to faster decision making to align the needs of the world with what's happening with students in real time. And we need those systems and structures to be flexible and adaptive, and networks overlaid over hierarchies is in that dual operating system model is one way to get a little bit of the stability and security that is a human need, coupled with that agility and speed that is more of a moral imperative today.
Yeah, well, I would argue that we never really had the luxury of 3 years to make decisions, but many people took them because it wasn't as glaring, right? It wasn't as dire in the face of a pandemic or, continued change to say we have to make changes quickly. And we realized how archaic many of the systems were that failed to allow people to move as quickly as they needed.
Well, and a lot of that is because of the invisibility of the adverse consequences. A student who drops out of school is often then unseen, and we're not seeing the urgency of changing those dynamics. And so I totally agree that, the risks of inaction have been very high for a long time. I just hope that we have a little more fuel and spark now, and that we recognize that we do not have that luxury of waiting, and we need to move now.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't going to ask you this, but you just reminded me. A lot of people say, oh, our systems have been doing well for a long time, and the hardest change is in school districts often that have been high performing. But I was talking to a superintendent about this the other day, and we were saying, like, even if you're quote unquote doing well, if 70, and really with No Child Left Behind metrics, or even like our standardized testing scores, if 70% of your kids pass a basic level test, basic level standards, that's considered great. But if you really look at the big picture, that's 30% of your kids who are not even meeting basic level. And that's the high bar. We really have to look at this and think about really raising the bar to thinking about what success is. And I don't think, I have seen, it doesn't leave more kids behind. It actually widens the aperture to allow more people to be involved and have a broader view of success, where more people can be seen, as you said, be seen and be successful in different ways.
Yeah, totally agree. And when you zoom out and you look at our system and you say we've had about an 80% high school graduation rate for 50 years, in spite of a lot of hardworking people, in spite of a lot of reform efforts, in spite of a lot of pockets of perceived success. What that tells you is that the industrial age system is optimized with those results. And the consequence is 20% of students, or 1 out of 5, does not even make it through high school. And so if that does not present a wake-up call for us and say, we have to do better for every learner, we have to do better for every community, we have to do better for our society, then I don't know what will do it. So Yes.
Well, and I think that is a place too where it does get the attention of the business community. When you present that data, the business community says, we got to do something about that. As evidence, parents are saying, we have to do something about this. This isn't working for my kids or part of my family or my students. And then you see, of course, educators, we don't want that to be our legacy either. So these are the opportunities to be able to have conversations about how do we address these challenges to meet the needs of all learners.
Mhm.
So I was going to ask you about the biggest barriers, but I think we just talked about some. What are some other barriers that, people are listening and you imagine that they're
Yeah.
thinking about or that we need to be addressing or talking about?
Yeah, well, the conditioning and the lenses that we've talked about, and really a simple way to help there is to get out of our own environments.
Mhm.
And so I was mentioning that I kind of generalized schools and systems based on my experience in Southern California, and then realized there is a wide range of contexts with a lot of similarities, but also a wide range of contexts. So really encourage people to get out of their environment and see other examples in action, because when you see it, you realize that a lot of the constraints that we thought we had are self-imposed, because if someone down the hall or down the street or across the country is able to do something in public school systems or with similar conditions, then it should be possible for all of us. So get out of our own environment is a simple thing to do. But the other two real big barriers that I see are the legacy accountability systems, which tend to rely on test scores, seat time, grading policies and practices that don't actually promote learning. And then I think the entry out of K-12 into higher education and industry, those are two sort of big systemic issues. And there's a lot that we can do to push on that through these conversations about what success really means. And it's going to take a lot of us coming together to kind of redefine accountability in broad terms and how we think about that transition from K-12 into higher ed in the workforce.
Awesome. Definitely challenges, but definitely huge opportunities.
Mhm.
So I'm going to close us up with a bright spot. So tell us a little bit about what you're most excited about in the coming years.
Oh boy. Well, I sort of already touched on it. I just see these bright spots all over the country with individual students and classrooms and schools and communities that are really stepping up and saying, we see what is possible here. We see how we can do things better together. And we're not going to wait for some outside in approach, and we are just going to move. And the fact that we see that in individuals and classrooms and schools and districts and now state departments, it tells me that there really is this movement. And so what I'm so excited about is I think there's real power in networks. And I think I can't wait to see what happens as we continue to connect these bright spots with one another so that we can accelerate our collective rate of learning and really create a network of networks to help us create a movement so that what is right now a little bit of an exception becomes the norm. Yeah. Because that is going to help us ensure that all learners know themselves and really thrive in community.
A la Eric Burmeister, we'll cross the chasm.
Correct. Yes, we're going to cross the chasm for sure together.
Yeah. So I couldn't agree more. And I think that there is that opportunity to come together. And, I always tell educators, there's no big plan coming, right? Like it's not the new phase of education is not like being rebuilt in some secret chamber that's going to all of a sudden be unveiled. Yes. It is each individual being brave, showing up, trying new things, and sharing that, right? Because there's great things happening in pockets, but the more we share it, the more we make it visible. And that's what I'm excited about too. I feel like we have an obligation to elevate these practices, to help people connect them and to build off what's working all across the country and world so that it can be more of the norm, like you said. So Awesome, awesome, awesome. I can't let you off the hook though without doing the rapid fire. So
All right.
loved having this conversation, sharing a little bit about LCC and the journey. But what is one thing that we should stop doing in education?
I think, I mean, I've touched on a few, but one that I think would have a profound effect would be getting away from seat time and going to actual learning as an outcome.
No, great idea. All right, what's one thing we should start doing?
Listen to students at every level. If you're a classroom teacher, principal, district office leader, school board member, you work at the U.S. Department of Ed, we need to stop and listen to our learners and really, really understand their needs, have empathy for their context, and then work with them to co-design what is possible in the future. And that's the way forward.
Love it. What should we keep doing?
You know, one thing that has been true in my experience is educators are so committed and so dedicated, and they work so hard. And by educators, I mean everyone in the system: bus drivers, classified employees, counselors, you know, anyone in education. Most people in education tend to be fueled by a desire to be of service to others, and that leads to really high levels of commitment and dedication, and that is a huge gift to the world. So we should keep being in service to one another.
Awesome. What are you focusing on or learning in your own journey right now?
Oh boy. I'm really excited about the enabling conditions right now. And so we're doing a series of experiences with some of our partners around culture, coherence, connectedness. And, you know, even though many of these are not new, I feel like coming back to them and trying to get clear about how we can help create frameworks that are useful for others. This is something that's really exciting for me right now.
Awesome. The surveys are really cool coming in too, seeing that data.
Mm-hmm.
What's one thing that many people don't know about you?
Oh boy, there are so many things that most people don't know about me. I think many people don't know that I was in a band when I was a teacher and used to play shows on Sunset Strip along with some of my friends, and you know, really enjoy the act of creating music. It's a fun thing, and I'm not very good at it, but I really, really enjoy it.
We'll have to dig that up and share it with
Or not,
everyone.
or not.
What is one of your favorite quotes or sayings?
Oh, I'm going to go back to Margaret Wheatley again. Margaret Wheatley has a saying, and I'm not going to get it exactly right, but it's something like leadership is always dependent on context. Context is always dependent on relationships. And I love how that brings us back to the importance of connectedness and the importance of relational trust and just being present with one another.
Yeah, great. What are you most grateful for right now?
Oh, I am most grateful for the fact that 8 years ago, I ran into Dr. Katie Martin, who was at the University of San Diego, and we started having some conversations about the future of education. And here we are almost a decade later, as you said, putting it out in the world and connecting with incredible educators across the country. And you know, it's a evolution of a journey, but I really feel like the best is yet to come. But I'm so grateful for your collaboration, your partnership, your leadership, all that you're doing to really inspire so many of us.
Right back at you. All right, last question. One hope for the future of education.
I feel like I've already said a few in this. One hope for the future of education.
You can restate one, just your opportunity to punctuate. what matters most.
Yeah, I hope that we really can come together, that we can find ways to move beyond the isolation that is so prevalent in our legacy systems, get away from self-contained classrooms, get away from, administrators working in isolation, school systems working in isolation. I am hopeful that we can come together, connect with one another authentically, learn from one another authentically, because that's how we're going to be at our best. That's how we're going to build the brightest future possible.
Love it. Devin, thank you for joining me here today, sharing some of your experiences and your aspirations. Super grateful for your leadership and all you do for us at LCC and in the broader education community.
Well, thank you, Katie.